It's beyond extraordinary to see what Elon's accomplished already. I know there is so much more to come from him as he continues to re-engineer our way of life on this planet, or should I say, in this universe. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me joining Elon Musk. Iron Man. First of all, as I said this morning, thanks for allowing us into your home, and particularly in such a busy time. Our goal for this next period of discussion is to really find out a bit more about where you came from, how you actually developed the person you became into, to learn about some of the ups and downs in Tesla and its energy and autonomous vehicle aspects, and then beyond that, trying to figure out your thoughts on where the world's going, some prognostication. So you've been called a lot of things. You've been called a visionary, an innovator, the real Iron Man, and I love the world's raddest man.
I've been called some other things. Less flattering sometimes.
Take us back to your early childhood. How did you develop South Africa and college in the US and Canada to having this just bold and big ambition? And what were some of the particularly influential moments or people that shaped it?
Well, actually, I sort of didn't expect to be doing this when I was. I'll try to talk loudly since we've got a factory in the background. I sort of didn't expect that any of this would happen. When I was growing up in South Africa, I mostly just read a lot of comics, played video games, programmed computers.
Created a video game at a young age?
Yeah. Wrote some games and sold them so I could get better computers. Sort of built rockets and did some circuitry, built radios and that kind of thing. I just wanted to be involved in the cutting edge of technology, and I thought that whenever there's something new that's invented, it's very often in Silicon Valley. So when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to ultimately end up here and be at the forefront of trying to create technologies that make the world better.
Well, a lot of people don't know this, but actually when you started your first company, you and Kimball actually slept at the company. Actually used it as house and business in those early days, a true entrepreneur.
Yeah. We only had between us, I think I had like $2,000 and Kimball had like $5,000. So we had to make it last a long time. That was like our total capital. And it was cheaper to just sleep in the office than rent an apartment. So we just slept in the office and went to they showered at the YMCA on Pageville and Altamino. That for a few months.
So after that success, you went on to another success with PayPal and sold the company to eBay for about $1.5 billion, pocketed about $165 million, and for a lot of people, the beach would have been attractive, but instead you decided to tackle the world's most pressing challenges. How did that unfold? How did you decide to go into energy and space?
Yeah, so actually, it kind of goes back to when I was in college. I thought, trying to think, one of the things that would most affect the future of humanity, so I came up with like 5 things. One was sustainable energy, both production and consumption, and the other was making life multiplanetary. Then there's the internet, of course, and then the other 2 items were rewriting human genetics and AI. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't too sure about the latter 2, sort of a double-edged sword where it's not clear which edge, whether the positive edge, I'm getting a bit of feedback, I don't know if that's, it wasn't clear if the positive edge or the negative edge is stronger. So, I was originally going to start off working on the electric vehicle problem. That's what brought me out to Silicon Valley. I was going to go to Stanford and do a PhD in applied physics and material science to try to figure out advanced energy storage techniques for electric vehicles. And then ended up deciding to put that on hold to try to do something on the internet, because I figured the internet was, it was really, that the time was right for the internet. It was like 95. I knew it would be something really transformative, and I didn't want to watched that happen while I was in grad school.
Right.
I figured I could always go back, so I went on deferment at Stanford, and I think I'm still on deferment. They actually said I could come back and I don't have to pay tuition.
There's a lot of Stanford folks here. Maybe we can figure out a way to get you back in at some point.
Yeah. So anyway, so kind of took a break from pursuing the electric vehicle thing to do a couple of internet companies that you mentioned.
Right.
And then after PayPal, decided to return to working on the electric vehicle problem, photovoltaics, and space exploration.
Right.
Yeah, so, you know, and didn't sort of really plan on being CEO of two companies, but it kind of worked out that way. It is, I have to say, quite a difficult thing. I wouldn't recommend it.
Well, you know, people always ask me to describe you, what kind of characteristics I observe, and you just touched on perhaps the one that I always lead with, which is you are the hardest working person I know. That's been true from the day I met you and all the way through today. Elon sleeps less than anyone I know and works harder than anyone I know. You know, when you think about this hasn't just happened. I mean, you have literally put your blood, sweat, and tears, and that's not in the rearview mirror. That's today.
I mean, I think sort of my obligations kind of require putting in a huge amount of time. And I would like to reduce it by a little bit, maybe 20% or so. But like, I mean, if you say like a 90-hour week, that's only 45 hours for SpaceX and Tesla. It's not that much really on a per company basis. So, you know, but it ends up being quite a lot on a personal basis. I mean, I think that they're both quite hard. Almost like the think about like the car industry. I mean, the only two American car companies that haven't gone bankrupt are Ford and Tesla. So a car company is sort of not the furthest thing from a national monopoly.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. It's not just that. When you started getting involved in Tesla, it was just at the beginning of people saying hybrid electric cars were actually going to be the way to the future. And so, in so many ways, you know, what seems so obvious today wasn't at all in the areas of all three of the companies you're involved with today. And in Tesla's case, clearly people weren't championing electric cars, but you saw that.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the company annual meeting will go through just recap kind of like the history of Tesla and how we started out and what led from one thing to the next. Because I think a lot of this stuff tends to get like lost in the midst of time. I mean, the genesis for Tesla was actually a lunch in 2003 with me and J.B. Straubel, right? One of the other co-founders, and it was actually, we were talking about like electric planes and space stuff, and then the conversation turned to electric vehicles. As I mentioned, that was like a long-term interest of mine, and it was what I was going to be working on at Stanford. And then JB had also worked on electric vehicles, and he mentioned like a little company in Southern California called AC Propulsion, which had created a T0, which is like a prototype sports car. And so I got to go to test drive the T0, and then I tried to convince AC Propulsion to commercialize the T0, because it was a cool concept, but it like didn't have a roof or any safety systems or anything. It was quite primitive, but it showed the basic fundamentals of what an electric sports car could do. So they deserve a lot of credit actually for Tesla. Like without AC Propulsion, I'm not sure. I mean, Tesla might have been started, but it would have been later.
Yeah.
And then after AC Propulsion, I couldn't convince them to commercialize the T0. They were so interested in making sort of prototypes. And I said, well, okay, well, if you're not going to do that, then I'd like to do it. And then they said, well, okay, well, there's some other people that also want to do it, so maybe you want to, join up with them. And so we created Tesla. I mean, interesting sort of little factoid, like in the beginning, we didn't actually own the trademark Tesla Motors. It was owned by some dude in Sacramento. That's right. So we were like, okay, we're gonna have to change the company name because we don't own the trademark. And we batted around various names, and one of the names was actually Faraday. Like that Faraday would have been my sort of second choice.
Wow.
Now, ironically, there's a competitor company called Faraday.
Right.
And Faraday was the guy that invented the electric motor.
Right.
And then Tesla invented the AC induction motor, which is the type of motor we use in the Model 3. Oh, sorry, the Roadster.
You know, people don't often, when you talk about the history of Tesla, people don't talk about it a lot today, but actually we started out as fellow board members and investors together, and you were actually the fourth CEO of Tesla, and we talk about some of the hard work. Those early days were ones that actually you probably put as much work in as in those days to transition, finally decided to take it over.
My initial goal when we created Tesla was I was just going to be kind of working on the product design and engineering, and I figured I would allocate 20% of my time to Tesla, and then sort of tried a succession of CEOs that didn't work out, and then I was like, well, either in 2008 I was faced with a choice of either Tesla's going to go bankrupt or I put all of my remaining capital in Tesla.
And more.
Yeah, it's borrowing money from friends and stuff. So at that point, I was like, man, I got like all my chips on the table. So I better, you know, if you got all the chips on the table, you've got to play the hand yourself.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I got to be CEO.
So you've come a long way since that time. When I think about some of the hallmarks of your success, a lot of things come to mind. You know, you're someone who I think fiercely independent, that you don't follow the herd, and actually, I think one of the underappreciated characteristics is you're actually one of the best listeners of anyone I work with, and take inputs from a wide variety of sources, and ultimately make your decision based on it. But incredible listener. People tend not to talk about as much.
Yeah, so what was
The other thing about you is you've managed to recruit a great team. You have a knack for hiring phenomenal people, sometimes unconventional hires. You know, think about your recruiting philosophy. Sometimes these are people who didn't actually have those roles before. I can think of a number of our executives here at Tesla who've been hugely successful, but they didn't have a history of having done it as many times before. But you saw the success in them.
Well, I think that the fundamental properties of somebody really driven and smart, and do they have a good feedback loop? Like, do they adjust their course of action based on their experiences, or do they think that they're right even when they're wrong? So I think just those are really, I think, the three things that are important, like sort of driven, fundamental sort of brain power, and then being self-critical. And if somebody has those three characteristics, they can pick something else up very quickly.
It's great advice. Let's talk more about Tesla, where we are today. When you think about, you referenced it, there just haven't been successful U.S. car companies. I remember when the company went public, the big news was first U.S. auto OEM IPO in more than 50 years.
Right.
Of course, you described the trend that's continued since then. What's enabled Tesla as such a young company, really young in the spectrum of car companies? It's only a little over a decade plus old.
Sorry, what do you think?
What do you think's enabled Tesla to compete against incumbency?
I think the main thing is that the incumbents are resistant to new technology, and I mean generally there's an opportunity for new companies when there's a significant technology discontinuity, some sort of step change in technology is what opens up an opportunity for a startup. I mean, certainly the world didn't need another car company that made gasoline cars. There are plenty of those, but no one was doing electric cars. The reason we started Tesla and put all the effort into it was not because we thought there was this huge opportunity in electric vehicles, but actually because no one was doing electric. I mean, it was like everyone thought it was stupid. And the big companies thought it was dumb, and there weren't really any startups doing it. So it's like if the big company's not going to do electric vehicles, then it has to come from a startup. And so that's the only option.
I remember a dinner you and I had with an unnamed, very large auto OEM CEO who was bemoaning that he couldn't actually create an electric car because it would cannibalize his business and would upset his employees. Dealer base.
I mean, I think you could. I mean, some of them later did. I mean, Bob Lutz. I mean, after we demonstrated the Tesla Roadster, then Bob Lutz kicked off the Volt program, which then also enabled the Nissan Leaf program. So even though the Roadster was a very low production vehicle, we didn't make very many of them, it had a very leveraged effect in forcing GM and Nissan to do EV programs. And actually, Bob Lutz was kind of to credit us with the inspiration for the Volt program. So we sort of Tesla had an outsized effect on the industry, even in the early days.
Which is one of the goals you've had since the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always thought that the biggest effect that Tesla would have would not be the cars that we made directly, but the cars we induced others to make.
So speaking of which, the transportation industry is actually undergoing massive change, and perhaps nothing more important than autonomous driving and ultimately self-driving. And talk about the impact that's having and going to have on transportation, particularly given the unutilized asset base of the automobile industry.
I think it's going to become common for cars to be autonomous, a lot faster than people think. I mean, probably, I guess, I don't know, 7 or 8 years from now, half of all cars produced will be fully autonomous.
Wow.
Something like that.
Yeah.
10 years for sure. It will just be like something that would be odd if it's not in your car.
Right. It's like not having GPS in the car today.
Yeah, not having GPS, something like that. But even bigger. It'll just be normal.
And what kind of impact does that have to the asset base?
It will certainly have higher utilization of cars. I still think most people are going to want to have their own car. Just like most people want to have their own house, and they don't want to sort of. I mean, in theory, you could, just do Airbnb and live in somebody else's house all the time. But people don't like that. And I think there's sharing, this sort of whole sharing economy is significant, but not the bulk of what will occur. Mostly people will still want their own car, just as they want their own house and they want their own clothes. I mean, you share everything, but you don't. So
we're sitting here in a 5.5 million square foot facility, but a bit further north is actually the Gigafactory, born out of necessity to actually power our next fleet of vehicles and transforming not just the automobile industry, but the energy industry as we know it. Talk a little bit about what's going on in Tesla Energy and the impact it's having.
Well, I mean, in order to solve the sort of energy problem, you have to get the cost to be competitive with fossil fuels, or close enough to be competitive, inclusive of incentives. I mean, the fundamental issue with fossil fuels is that there's effectively an implied incentive. Every use of fossil fuels comes actually with a subsidy. This is what people don't totally appreciate. Because whenever you're not paying the true cost of an unpriced externality, you're effectively subsidizing something. It would be like if you could just dump garbage in the street and not pay for garbage pickup. Well, that's obviously a subsidy. So every gasoline car on the road, every one of them has a subsidy. It's a subsidy of the public good. And so now the right way to address that gasoline car subsidy is with a carbon tax. If you talk to any economist, they will tell you, of course, that's the right way to fix the pricing mechanism. But passing a carbon tax is usually politically difficult, particularly when you have enormous lobbying power on a part of the fossil fuel industry, preventing that from occurring. So then politicians usually choose the easier path of providing subsidies to electric vehicles, which are usually don't equal the implied subsidy of gasoline vehicles. And then of course get attacked like what? As though EVs are being subsidized but gasoline cars are not, when in fact gasoline cars are receiving a bigger subsidy of the public good than EVs are. This is a fundamental conceptual misunderstanding.
You know, at DBL, we think we got to embrace policy. DBL did an extraordinary white paper on the subsidy of fossil fuels and works very hard to focus on important policy objectives in addition to the technology. That's been something you and Tesla and Solar City have really taken seriously and spent a significant amount of time. You know, as you're advising our community, thinking about how we actually can push the agenda forward. You know, people talk about how great the cars are, but we actually need policy initiatives to push the agenda to hit the kind of vision that you have.
Yeah, the tough thing is that because gasoline and oil is like so cheap, fracking technology has really driven the costs down dramatically. What this effectively does is weaken the economic forcing function to transition to sustainable transport and to sustainable energy in general. It's really quite bad for the world. I was encouraged by the Paris talks. You know, these countries have committed, globally to do something to sort of address the unpriced externality of changing the chemical composition of the oceans and atmosphere. But it is happening slowly, and then unfortunately technology advancements in the extraction of fossil fuels have improved tremendously, driving the costs down. So it is quite worrying for the future of the world. I think the only thing that can be done here is to try to appeal to the people, educate people to sort of revolt against this, and to sort of fight the propaganda of the fossil fuel industry, which is unrelenting and enormous. In fact, one thing that happened was like after the IMF came out with their study showing that fossil fuels are subsidized to the tune of $6 trillion a year, like $6 trillion per year. Then some representative of the oil and gas industry added up all incentives that Tesla has received and will receive in the future, which happens to coincide with $6 billion. But this includes if you count everything Tesla will receive over the next 20 years. Okay, that's like calling somebody who owns 50,000.
And I think the loan that was paid back.
Yeah, including the loan that was paid back, that was added in there as well. Right? Like, what the, paid that back. So, with interest. And it was like, your taxes went down as a result of that, not up. They wanted it to start with a 6. So basically, roughly a month or two after the IMF study, they started shopping that story around to journalists. Tesla's getting a $6 billion subsidy, and it sounds a bit like the $6 trillion subsidy,
Because it has a 6 in it.
it's got a 6 in it, and billion, trillion, it's kind of close.
Not the same level.
Except out of the 6 billion over 20 years, there's 6 trillion per year. Yeah, but close. And they got the LA Times to buy it on a bullshit story.
That's right.
That was totally nonsensical. And unfortunately, so that's like just one example of this sort of propaganda war.
It's important. You keep fighting back, and everyone needs to do their part to do the same. Let's switch gears before we wrap up to just some of your other things about how you think. And one of you referenced it earlier. You talked a bit about AI. Ray Kurzweil talked about the law of accelerating returns, where the notion that analysis of the history of technology is exponential, not linear. And over time, the potential of machines actually to take over human learning. Give us your thoughts on AI.
That's a complicated answer. mean, I think it's pretty obvious that machine intelligence is on a track to vastly exceed human intelligence. I mean, and one of the things about an exponential is that close up, an exponential looks linear. If you sort of zoom in, it looks linear. But actually, if you plot the points on a curve, it's obviously exponential. And there's some argument of, if you say it's exponential, what's the y-axis? And I think you can arguably say it's a recursive y-axis. So if, in any given year, if you think that AI is going to happen sooner, rather than, if your predictions for the advancement of AI are converging with each passing year, right, then it's fair to say that it is an exponential growth. And that certainly is, I think, been the case, certainly for me. So it's a really interesting question. Like, I think there's, even in the benign scenario, there is tremendous upheaval in terms of employment.
Yeah.
If you have self-driving cars, then what happens to the 12% of the population whose job it is to drive a car, right? Or drive a truck or something like that? I mean, I think that these are really profound questions we're going to have to face in the future. But it's going to go beyond self-driving cars. That's a case of narrow AI. And cars not going to take over the world or do anything. It's going to feel like an elevator. You used to have like elevator operators. And you have to be like a trained elevator expert to operate the elevator. And now you scan it and press a button, and we don't worry about it. It's going to be the same thing for cars. It's going to feel just like that. But eventually, if digital intelligence becomes superhuman, which it's, like I said, it's on track to be, then it will be able to do everything that we can do better than we can do.
Let me ask you to go back to SpaceX for a moment, because since we gathered here 2 years ago, what SpaceX has accomplished in the last few years is nothing short of staggering. The recent landing has been described as perhaps the most significant event in the area of space in decades. But what's interesting is if you look out over the coming year is perhaps even more exciting. Just give folks a bit of a preview as to what's coming down the pipe in September and what's going on at SpaceX.
Yeah, so we're aiming to refly one of the landed boosters later this year. Yeah. So that'll be significant. We've got Falcon Heavy, which will be the biggest rocket, the highest payload to orbit since Saturn V. Yeah, that'll be a fun one to watch. If you're taking them from Cape Canaveral, I'd recommend coming. You won't need to be close to really experience what it's like. That'll be pretty epic. And then actually we're going to try to bring back all three boosters, side boosters in the center core. So it's going to be like this, orbital gymnastics, synchronized gymnastics. It's going to be like, I mean, we'll see what happens. Rockets are tricky. Then next year, if schedules hold, we'll be transporting astronauts to the space station for the first time. Apparently the US is dependent on Russia for transporting astronauts to the space station, so we're looking forward to doing that mission. And then
recent military contract win?
Yeah, we finally won an Air Force launch, which was a tough battle. Boeing and Lockheed had been fighting for years to prevent us from being able to compete. So they kept getting these exclusive sole source contracts with DoD, and finally it was opened up to competition. Not the whole contract, but just a few of them. And we won our first sort of serious Air Force launch contract. So that's great. Looking forward to doing a lot of launches with the Air Force in the future. And then we also announced that we're going to be doing our first mission to Mars, probably in 2018, so only a couple of years away from now. So we send one of our Dragon 2 spacecraft to the surface of Mars using our Falcon Heavy rocket. And Dragon 2 is designed to land propulsively, and it's got a heavy-duty heat shield. So in order to land on Mars, you really need a powerful heat shield, that can withstand extreme heat, and then be able to land propulsively. So this will be an important pathfinder for ultimately the Mars colonial architecture.
So I began by describing you as engineering our future, and you've heard a lot of examples of the way you're doing it, but I think what's most interesting to me about watching what you and Tesla have done is what I talked about before, is debunking this notion of trade-off, debunking this notion that you have to compromise what you want to accomplish for the world and what you want to accomplish from a business perspective. And, you know, Tesla was clearly founded as a purpose-driven company, as was Solar City, and SpaceX. And you know, at DBL, it's built on the premise of mission-driven companies and backing the kind of impact entrepreneurs that you and Tesla represent. Can you just talk about that? That's such an important theme of your leadership and your philosophy about how you marry the two and how you're actually showing both with the products as well as the kind of companies you're involved with, that it is not about trade-off or compromise, but the first and second bottom line go hand in hand.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think generally, I consider sort of any product that other people in society find useful. I mean, I think that's a great thing too. So, you know, I wouldn't want to sort of, you know, claim some great morality or anything. It's, I think anything that's done that's useful to other people is good. So, I mean, I think that's like one of the hardest things, is just doing something that is useful and that makes a difference. It makes people's lives better. All sorts of products do that, but you know, the uphill battle for Tesla and Solar City, the real uphill battle there is because of, you know, the reason that I felt it like really needed a lot of sort of entrepreneurial skill on the part of, say, the, you know, Lyndon and Pete and others at Solar City and the team we have here at Tesla, was that it's just fundamentally an economic uphill battle, because you have, because carbon is not priced correctly, it fundamentally makes the problem much harder. It's like you're just competing against something which which has a $6 trillion a year subsidy of the public good, and so that's just really difficult. Yeah, so in order to overcome that, at Tesla we try to make the car as compelling as possible, even though, you know, it's a little more expensive than a gasoline car of equivalent capability, or at least a little bit more expensive. So, but we can overcome that by just making the car very compelling. And then solar's sort of harder, because it's harder to get product differentiation on solar. That's why the solar industry has been a really difficult industry. But nonetheless, I mean, with a lot of effort, you can get to, you can make a viable company. But it's just considerably harder when the rules of the game do not favor sustainable energy. I mean, that's like the fundamental problem, is that the way the rules are set up, they do not favor sustainable energy. Yeah, that's something that we really need to fix collectively. People will need to fix that collectively. I'm sort of excited by what I see, like the level of energy about this with millennials and sort of younger people is, I mean,
they get it.
Yeah. So I do think it's just a matter of time before this happens, and the question is just how long. And in fact, in terms of thinking of, say, the fundamental good of Tesla or Solar City, I would characterize its sort of fundamental good in to what degree, how many years did it accelerate sustainability? Yeah, like electric vehicles and solar, all that stuff would happen no matter what. But the fundamental good, in a stark context, can be measured by to what degree did Tesla accelerate the advent of sustainable transport. You know? So like if we were able to accelerate it by like a decade, that would be amazing. That would be great.